You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Doctorow,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is...
Thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have Kristin Contino on the show with me. She has an amazing new book. It's called A House Full of Windsor, and this is one of the most unique books that I've read this year. And it's definitely one of those stories that the characters just linger with you when the book is done, which is what we love. We want to escape into a book and then make new friends with the characters that can journey through life with us. And A House Full of Windsor is one of those books. Welcome to the show, Kristin.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. And that's so nice of you to say.
Absolutely. Kristin, we begin each show with the same question. And that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
So when I was a kid, I used to write short fiction stories all the time, and I would actually get in trouble in class for writing stories. I would write them with my friends sometime. I still have some of them, actually. I just found we were doing some renovations upstairs, and I have, some memento boxes that were kind of shoved in the guest room, and I found a folder that had one of the stories from, I guess I was probably around 8 or 9. And so, yeah, it's kind of something always I've done. I don't have, I guess, a specific memory that stands out, but just, being a kid and making up these stories. And I was obsessed with teenagers. I don't know why, because when you're 8 or whatever, being a teenager is so cool. And I have an 8-year-old son now, and he'll say things like, look, I look like a teenager. So it's funny. But yeah, I would write these stories about, these cool teenagers. I think, Beverly Hills 90210 was out at the time and all that stuff. So that was what I thought was super cool and would write fiction about. And yeah, I guess it worked out.
Kristin, would you say that you grew up in a creative household? Was that sort of thing encouraged? I love to hear stories of youngsters who were encouraged by a parent or another family member, or maybe it was a teacher. Because a writer's life can be kind of stifling and lonely, and a lot of times we'll reach back and pull some of those early encouragements. And I love to hear how those things have carried on with people. Did you have any experience like that?
So in terms of a creative household, I would say no. I mean, no one in my family, works in any sort of creative industry per se, but I was definitely encouraged to read, by my parents and my grandmother. We lived with my grandmother growing up, and she would always read to us. And, she loved reading my stories and all of that. So my family definitely encouraged, my passion for reading and for writing. Absolutely. But I am the only one in my family who is crazy enough to be a writer.
I love that. Kristin, when you from an early age, you knew that you were a storyteller and that you would be a writer in some capacity. When you got out of high school and started, finding your way into life, and did you pursue that, or did writing come back around to you?
So I did, yes. I was a journalism major in college, and I had always wanted to be a magazine writer, actually. Like writing for People magazine or something like that was my dream. And somewhere along the way, I ended up getting interested in public relations as well. And this was also when Sex and the City was super popular, and, Samantha and the whole New York, PR thing was very glamorous. And I think I got a little bit caught up in that and wanting to be in that world. And I did some PR internships, and I worked in New York and in Philly. And I ended up, instead of, writing in that sense, doing more PR writing and pitching and being on the other side of the media. So I did that for about 10 years, actually. And then I got laid off in 2010. And all along, I had always kind of wanted to write a book. And I, dibbled and dabbled in that for fun, but I hadn't written very much. I mean, maybe a couple of chapters in my early 20s. And, when I lost my job, I really had no excuse not to, finish this book that I had been working on here and there. So I actually sat down and, finished my first novel at that time. But yeah, I mean, so yes and no, like I did pursue it, but then it came back to me.
I love to ask people who have spent time in journalism or studied journalism, what kind of tools do you feel like that you picked up along the way that journalism taught you, or that you gathered in working in that industry, that now helps you as a fiction writer? You think about journalism and fiction writing being on opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yes.
But I think there are tools that you pick up along the way that help you to, I don't know, study characters, things that journalists are trained to notice that then help you as a fiction writer.
Sure. So I still work in journalism now. I'm a chief reporter for a royalty website called Royal Central. And so I do both. And I think it's interesting because in terms of journalism, you're always kind of asking questions and looking for more and looking to research. So I think the research tools especially have helped me in terms of fiction. Researching a story either way, or fiction or nonfiction, takes some time. And, when you're studying journalism, you're taught to, dig deeper and ask questions and how to, find more. So I think that's certainly helpful.
What was your earliest fascination with the royal family and this idea of royalty? It's something that, as Americans, and we're literally recording this right after the 4th of July, and so there are definitely interesting feelings about the royal family and our lineage as Americans, and how we're still connected to that sort of recently ancient past. But what was it that sparked your interest in this thing that we don't really have in America?
So growing up, my mom was really interested in Princess Diana. And so that was something that I, grew up around, Princess Diana things in the house. She'd read the magazines, all that stuff. So I definitely looked up to her as a role model, when I was young, in terms of fashion or just being, interesting, glamorous, exciting. And when I studied abroad in London, I remember, one of my friends saw Prince Charles when they were out and about, and I was so jealous. But I didn't really become super interested myself in the royal family in terms of, following them as closely as I do now, until probably William and Kate got engaged, and, watching the wedding and all of that. And I think a lot of people, around my age would say the same thing, that their wedding either, kind of reignited their interest in the royal family or maybe started a new one. And yeah, ever since then, I think it's everywhere in the news, everywhere you turn, and they've definitely, reignited some interest there.
Your first book that you published, The Legacy of Us, and you told me a minute ago about being laid off and kind of being faced with the perfect opportunity to work on something that you had been passionate about for a while. Was The Legacy of Us the story that was in your mind when you started working on that, or did this come later? How did that book come about?
It was, although I ended up changing it quite a bit. So I was working on a story that was about people who were my age, who were kind of in this period where you just graduate from college and you're feeling a little bit lost, in terms of job or relationships and not sure, what your path is going to be. And I had written these characters, but I wasn't really sure where it was going to go other than, wanting to explore this time period in your life. And then I had the idea actually, so after I had got laid off, my husband's grandmother passed away just not long before that. And we had, gone through some things in the house, and she had this cameo necklace and a pin, like a series of jewelry with cameos, and they're from Italy. And, they were quite old, but we didn't know anything about them. And we were just kind of chatting about it the one day. And I thought, that would be an interesting story of kind of like how someone had inherited this piece, but following the piece itself through generations, and, over 100 years or whatever the case might be, in a family, and like the different stories that could follow it. And then suddenly I was like, I can take the characters I have now, but integrate them into this story. So the characters from the story I was already working on showed up in the Legacy of Us, and I just kind of twisted that to also add like 2 other points of view that were historical. So it was funny how that worked out, because it's totally not the story I intended to write.
Looking for a tool to help you visualize your story before the drafting begins? Plot Pens is cloud-based and optimized for any device. There's nothing to download. From the new writer who isn't sure how to tell their story to the veteran who can increase their productivity dramatically, we've had experienced writers lay out a detailed structure for several novels in a series in a matter of a few days. The app takes you through 4 steps of the process: the concept or logline. Make sure you have a solid concept that you can keep coming back to throughout the process. The outline, 12 beats and 3 acts, each has a description of what should be happening with examples. The board, 40 cards. We take the 12 beats and add sub-beats to those, breaking it down even further and being very specific about what should go into each. These also have examples and descriptions. Right. We take those 40 cards and turn them into a to-do list. For a 50,000 word book, it's about 2 cards per chapter roughly. We have a beautiful editor built into the app. You can export your manuscript to a PDF anytime with the click of a button. Let Plot Pens help you visualize your writing project. Use code HANK10 to get 10% off Plot Pens. plotpens.com.
Authors, I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates. PubSite is the new, easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of 1 book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web.
But isn't that great when that happens? Like when the story just kind of takes a life of its own.
It was fun because I had always had these characters kind of with me, and then I got to still use them, but in a different way.
So from the Legacy of Us, you have always been an Anglophile, like you've told us about, and have loved the royal family and following along with that. When did you decide to write a story that would kind of encapsulate that?
So I was watching an episode of Hoarders, as one does on, a boring Sunday or whatever it was. And this woman, she had a daughter, and the daughter was speaking about how her mother's hoarding had really impacted her life and her job, her relationships, all these different things. And I said, that's a really interesting idea for a book of how, the children of someone who is a hoarder, like how would this impact them? And I started thinking about it, and I didn't want to write a book about, someone with rotting animals or, gross stuff in their house.
Right.
Nobody wants to read about that. But I thought, what if it was some sort of quirky and interesting collection she had? And immediately what came to mind was the royal family. So Debbie, one of the main characters in the book, is a compulsive hoarder, but she calls herself kind of an organized hoarder, where she is obsessed with the royal family and has accumulated all these things in her home to the point where it's not really safe for her to live there anymore.
Other than the television show that you were watching, what did you do to kind of get inside the head of a hoarder?
So I read a few really interesting nonfiction books about kind of the psychology of hoarders. And funnily enough, one of them is called Stuff, which is the name of the reality show in my book. I had already called it that. So I thought, this is a sign. This is a good book to read. And it's fascinating. I mean, if you're at all interested in kind of the mindset of how people end up this way, it's a great book. I definitely recommend it. And there was another book I read, which was a memoir, and I'm blanking on the title right now, but it was about the daughter of a hoarder and just kind of her life and, living in that type of house and how she dealt with her mother. So that was a good resource as well. And I actually have a friend whose mother is a compulsive hoarder. So I spoke to her a bit about that, and she was super helpful.
Did as someone who follows the royals and likes to keep up with that and is a bit of an expert, how fun was it to bring that aspect into the story and to in a little bit of a way to kind of poke fun at kind of the way we obsess over things?
It was really fun. I mean, I definitely enjoyed that. And, of course, me bringing that aspect into the story was kind of my way to, have fun with it. And a lot of my friends, who are royal watchers, I had some of them read early copies, and they really enjoyed that part, because I think it may be a bit deceiving that, the cover is very British and royal, and there's, Union Jacks and everything all over it. So I think people might think automatically, well, this is about the royal family, or it's, super British. And it is, but it isn't, because it's really at the heart of family story and kind of how this family comes together to overcome these problems. But it's kind of set, aside the story of, the woman being obsessed with the royal family, and it certainly plays a big part, but it's more background than, not.
Well, this book is definitely, I would say, a relationship book, but not in the sense that most relationship books are. This is a family relationship, and how difficult was it for you to really draw out the characters of Sarah and her mother Debbie, and kind of how did you shift perspectives so that you could bring us the story from different angles and be fair to the characters?
So I think there's a little bit of me in both of them too, which maybe made it easier in that sense. But I always write from multiple perspectives. The Legacy of Us was 3 POVs. This is 2. So that's the way I'm used to writing. And it just, I guess my brain works well that way, switching back and forth. I think it makes it a little bit more fun for me to kind of have a break to, of writing from one point of view, then I can go back to another, and it's I mean, it's not like writing a different book, but it's, it's totally different. And I think it's fun in that sense to change gears and change mindset. But yeah, I wanted them to be quite different in terms of personality and really draw on the fact that Sarah was totally trying to be the opposite of her mother in, almost, I mean, not every way, but many ways, just because of her experience growing up the way she did. So I thought, well, what would you do if you had a mother like that? You would either become like her or you would become the complete opposite of her. So I decided to go on that path, which I think is a little bit more interesting than having two people who are, stuck in the same position.
Sure. When Debbie was younger, she was in England and became pregnant with Sarah. And as the story unfolds, we really get the sense that there's more of a connection there than is on the surface. How fun was it to kind of play with the ideas of emotions that are not obvious, but kind of seeing them manifest through people's behaviors?
Yeah, I find that super interesting. And I want it to tie in Debbie's, how she ends up becoming a compulsive hoarder with her, A, the breakdown of her marriage, but B, also her interest in the royal family and how the two of them kind of come together. And, the breakdown of her marriage isn't necessarily entirely the fault of her being obsessed with Princess Diana, but part of it is. And I think it's interesting when you can see like little things that build up throughout the story to end up how she is in the end, and you get little clues as it goes along. But also, Debbie being in England, I also studied abroad in London, and actually this school where Debbie goes is the school where I went, which is my little Easter egg in there. But I kind of wanted to play with the idea of, what if you never left? Because a lot of my friends, and myself included, it was hard to leave when you're moving to another country and, you're becoming used to it and having so much fun and embracing the culture. And then abruptly it comes to an end. And that's kind of something I wanted to go along with Debbie and then explore, well, what happens if you stay?
Kristin, in the writer community, we love to put people in one of two camps. Either someone is a pantser and writes by the seat of their pants and just discovers the story as they're writing. And then we like to think of the other camp as being plotters, or people that really work on where the story's going and have a map before the writing ever begins, and then they follow the map that they've drawn out. Which camp do you fall in, if you abide by those the idea that there's only two ways to do it?
So I would say I'm a pantser, but for the book I'm working on now, I actually wrote an outline for the first time in my life, although I've definitely deviated from it. So I would still say I'm a pantser. The House Full of Windsor. I mean, The Legacy of Us, I did nothing. I just sat down and wrote it. There was no prep involved in that. There was a little more with The House Full of Windsor, just in terms of the research aspect. And I knew, generally what was going to happen, but I don't like sit there and write detailed character profiles and all of these things and on a whiteboard. And I pretty much just start writing. So I would say pantser, but with a little bit of maybe additional work.
When you begin to work on a book, what comes first? Is it a plot point? Is it a setting, or is it a specific character that then finds her way into some problem that you have to write them out of? What is that first inkling of the story? What does it look like for you?
So for me, it's always a plot point, and it's usually some kind of high concept thing, like an etiquette expert's mother is a hoarder and they end up on a reality show. That was kind of what was in my head for A House Full of Windsor. So definitely plot.
Gotcha. So, Kristen, can you tell us anything about the book that you're working on now? Like after, writing the first book and now A House Full of Windsor, do you feel like you're settling into a vein that someone could pick up a book and say, oh, this is a Kristin Contino book? Like, do you feel like that you're that you're settling into a genre of your own?
It's an interesting question because I feel like yes and no. With The Legacy of Us, that was also very much, I think, like A House Full of Windsor, even though it was super different, a family relationship book. Well, also it had, more romantic elements than A House Full of Windsor does. But, exploring, complicated relationships between mothers and daughters and sisters and whatnot. And the book I'm working on now is a little bit different. I would say it's probably closer to a contemporary romance than women's fiction, which my first two books are, although it's definitely crossover. But it also has an Anglophile kind of bent to it. And I don't want to say a whole lot about it because I'm not quite there yet, but
Sure.
I'm having a lot of fun with it. And I'm researching a lot about stately homes and these country houses in the UK, which is something I'm super interested in to begin with. And I drag my family all over to these places when we're on vacation. So that has been fun for me, although unfortunately, not traveling the past, year and a half has put a damper on the research, but I'm moving along, so I'm happy with that.
With two books published, working on your third, I know that you said that you approached the pre-writing a little different for the new book with an outline. How else have you seen your creative process change or settle into things that seem to fit you better as a creative person?
Yeah, like with the outline, I think for this book, that was helpful just for me to get the idea out there. And I think I wrote, I don't know, it was like a 5-page or whatever outline that I wrote. Actually, I think it wasn't even really an outline, it was a synopsis. People hate writing a synopsis, but I actually am good at it and I think it's easy. So I'm a weirdo in that sense. So I actually wrote the synopsis. I'm calling it an outline. It's really not. It was a synopsis. And that really helped me get this idea out on the page because I was reading a Hello magazine about this, aristocratic family in the UK, and it sparked an idea. And so I just took out my computer and randomly started writing a synopsis like a crazy person in, like a half hour or whatever. And I was like, oh, I have an idea for a new book, which was different for me because I've, never done that. But I think things like that help me now just kind of wrap my head around it, and whether or not I follow that to a T is a different story, but it is definitely useful. I think in the past I would get stuck because, I was just sitting there flying by the seat of my pants completely. And my brain also does work that way in the sense where like the characters just tell me what's going on and I kind of go for the ride. But it's also, in terms of productivity, maybe a little bit better to have more of a, firm grasp on the idea before starting. So I think that has helped with this one.
You touched on this already, but in your answer there, but how bound do you feel to that synopsis that you write? Do you feel like if you start deviating from that you're getting away from the core of the story, or does the synopsis just act as a springboard to kind of let you know kind of where the story is?
Yeah, it's definitely a springboard. I veer off in different directions, and that's fine because I know if I have an idea that I think is going to work, that's, better than being like bound to this document, which, doesn't really mean anything. I think it's different too if you're under contract and your publisher is, expecting or has approved, XYZ. I'm not under contract for this book, so I have a lot more freedom. So that's nice. And I can just kind of go where I want it to.
When you're hearing this episode, A House Full of Windsor is available everywhere now. You can grab it in Kindle edition or paperback. We're going to put links to it in the show notes of this episode where people can click on it, buy it from Amazon, or if your local bookstore has opened back up, please go visit your local bookstore and support local businesses for sure. Kristin, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, where can they find you online?
So I'm most active on Instagram, and I'm at Royally Kristin C. That's KristinC. And my website is KristinContino.com, KristinContino.
Excellent. We'll put links to those places as well to make it easy for people to find you. Kristin, this has been so much fun chatting. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you.
Wargate Books presents Hit and Fade, Forgotten Ruin, Book 2, by Jason Anspach and Nick Cole. Narrated for you by Christopher Ryan Grant. Chapter 1. The army of the dead walked straight into our ambush east of Fortress Hawthorne. That's what the FOB is called now, Fortress Hawthorne. Despite it being officially known as Forward Operating Base Hawthorne, as was originally intended when the 50 detachments of various special operations groups came forward through time from Area 51. A one-way mission to save Western civilization from a rampaging nanoplague destroying the very fabric of said civilization. Apparently, we overshot the temporal insertion point and stuck the landing. Sorta. About 10,000 years too late. Said civilization is now basically something straight out of Tolkien or Dungeons and Dragons, which we've all now gotten a lot more familiar with thanks to our resident expert and fledgling hedge wizard, the infamous PFC Kennedy. But the Rangers just call it the FOB. The first of our explosives to ruin the leading elements of the army of the dead advancing on us, Claymore mines the recaptured forge back at Hawthorne had cranked out in the weeks after we'd retaken it from King Triton, were fired by Ranger Sergeant Kang down there with the scouts and Captain Knifehand's assaulters. It was close to midnight when the front rank of bony warriors, carrying rotting shields and spears, eyes glowing malevolently in the deep night mist, advanced into our ambush, only to get ruined by the daisy-chained claymores' sudden eruption. Above us, a cloud-shrouded moon cast a wan yellow light over the battlefield. The night was hot, and spring was coming on full now. The pilots who'd gotten us here in the grounded C-17 back at Ranger Alamo, using their meteorology skills, had guessed it was going to be a long, hot summer ahead of us, and an early one at that. But there was a cold shiver in the dark on your exposed skin that you couldn't quite explain when you saw the dead advancing rank after rank. The bone warriors, carrying spear and shield, other darker creatures barely seen. The lower areas of the earth were graveyard cool and misty, so maybe that was it. Still, the brutal, unrelenting cold of our almost last stand back at Ranger Alamo was gone now. But not the horrors. There wasn't a night that some ranger didn't wake up out of a tormented sleep, breathing heavy, sidearms scanning the dark and looking for orcs and ogres to ventilate. I was sweating in the hour leading up to the attack, despite the night and the mist. Kurtz had us humping hard to get the 240 and all its ammo up to the top of a small hill that overlooked the area where we'd channel the advancing echelons of the Army of the Dead into further fun and games the Rangers had planned at a bend in a riverbed. If the approaching Army of the Dead continued on their current course track, they'd enter it for a brief period. It was decided by the captain we'd kill them there. And I was sweating. Not because of fear. No, not at all. "Firing," whispered Sergeant Kang over the comm as he detonated the mines. and 8 daisy-chained claymores spat thousands of steel balls all across the front line of what even I was still finding it hard to believe I was seeing through my night vision device. Skeletons. Warrior skeletons. Ancient warriors like something out of the Bronze or Iron Ages. Worked breastplates of molded plate or rotting scales. Green and tarnished, stamped with the markings of fabled armies fallen in battles long, long ago. Leather cuirasses on some, rotting boots, helms with broken horns, missing teeth, tattered leather kilts, beads and charms dangling from bone wrists, enigmatic holy signs and primal torques black with grave dirt, or from a funeral pyre long ago on some forgotten battlefield far from here, draped about the spine where the throat should be, where it rises to connect to a bone-white skull that seems filled with malevolent purpose and diabolical intelligence, malignantly so. Walking skeletons like something out of a Ray Harryhausen clay model Sinbad epic from the 1960s. Above, the sliver of moon gave enough light to strengthen our NVGs, making the night vision devices perform exceptionally well as we sprang our trap and watched the advancing elements get rocked by our initial high-explosive opening bid in the game we were about to play. The air was still and hot in the moments before the fight began as we lay there in the tall, sharp grass, waiting for it all to go down. I was thinking a hot cup of coffee would be nice about now, except my canteen only had cold coffee I'd brewed during the long, silent, and windy afternoon of preparation. Still, I was happy knowing I had some, rather than none.
Authors, if you're looking for a partner to help ensure that your book is the best it can possibly be, look no further than Pico's House. Crystal and her staff make a conscious effort to be critical yet courteous. They also strive to make the business side of things run smoothly so that you can rest easy knowing that your manuscript is in capable hands. Whether you need beta reading, developmental editing, a manuscript critique, line editing, copy editing, or proofreading, Pico's House is the one-stop shop for you. Check them out today at picoshouse.com to get started.